What's going on, John? How are you, mate?
I'm very well, thank you, buddy. And how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. It's an absolute belter out there. It's warm. I'm sweating. I'm sticky. All that good stuff. So yeah, appreciate you giving up your time and not being outside in the garden playing football or something.
Yeah,
we, well, yeah. How about you tell me and some of the listeners, mate, a little bit of who you are, what you've done, all those types of things. Give us a little bit of an insight.
Sure. So, well, currently working as a performance coach for myself, and I moved to self-employment a little over 4 years ago now. So I'm still very much learning, but really enjoying the journey and the stages that I've been through there. But I started my career, I actually worked in gyms for about 3 years. And along that journey of not being really that good as an athlete, but really fundamentally being passionate about the preparation, physical preparation behind trying to be an athlete at least. I started coaching in that space and enjoyed it. Realized that actually working with athletes at a level where people took it a bit more seriously was an interest to me. So that then kind of bred the idea of university. So degree level at Hull in sports science, followed by an MSc, which I didn't finish there, which is an interesting step because I guess like most of us struggled to do a full-time program whilst being an intern full-time at a football club. So needless to say that the studies took a bit of a backseat there. But the first full-time experience was Scunthorpe United in 2003-4, I believe, 2002, and that time was doing the MSc program. I'd done a couple of sort of regional volunteering stuff within local stuff within football, and football was for me at the time at least the vehicle that was going to take me to working as a professional S&C coach. And went through those levels at university, and then decided that I really want to take it on a bit further. So pushed really hard at university to build some good relationships. And the idea from Scunthorpe then went into Chelsea. So I spent about a year and a half at Chelsea, and that was a really interesting step because I knew that I was still a very young, developing S&C coach, very green behind the ears, and largely, if you will, some of the day-to-day responsibilities that I had was warm-ups, water bottles, and piss pots, and that initially was very glamorous, especially at Chelsea Football Club, and you're seeing the likes of Didier Drogba knockabout. But very quickly you realised that I could stay here and have a really nice lifestyle and great earning, but within that construct of what you were doing at that time in football, challenge of compliance in the weight room, an area that I was really passionate about for development on the pitch, you were limited by opportunities. So I decided to leave that environment and went into rugby because I figured that was the space that lads were, there's a natural congruence with they do physical work in the gym because of how it underpins their performance on the pitch. And I really enjoyed that. And that was in rugby union for a few years in an academy before I went into the first team program. This was at Leeds Carnegie back at the time. And then I started to dabble a little bit on the side with some individual stuff. So I started working in snow sport with a women's border cross athlete. We only had one in the UK, unsurprisingly. But that was a really cool journey. And then that kind of bled into introductions within alpine skiing and freestyle ski snowboard. So I left rugby for a full-time role in freestyle ski snowboard, part of the Pyeongchang program, getting athletes ready for the winter sport program there. Really enjoyed it, but parallels from more of traditional athletes who turn up to an academy, to a facility, they buy into the environment, and X equals Y training to match day. And in the free sport world, it was much more adrenaline junkies walking around in board shorts, and it wasn't necessarily a language that I knew very well. So that was a really cool learning curve, but kind of nonetheless, the philosophies that I went with were fundamentally quite similar to what I was doing previously. It was assessing the demands of the sport. It was building the appropriate methodologies and communicating in a way that, was at the heart of it was buy-in really, and fundamentally to try and get good compliance and build good relationships. So the previous definitely put me in a good standing. I then went back from there into rugby league, flashing the pan of rugby league for about a year before I went back into professional football, this time at academy level at Everton. And really enjoyed my time there. Some fundamentally really, really great people that are class as friends and colleagues to this day. And it was at that point that I'd got married and I had a child, and the demands, at least in lifestyle, were a little bit different. Sleep was a bit more of a premium. My own time was more scarce. So with that said, and wanting to spend a bit more time around as a dad and a husband, I decided that actually not having the control and ownership of my my working week, my lifestyle, and the opportunities that came with it, I wanted to take more control, and within that, still work on projects and with people that were really fulfilling and exciting at the heart of it fundamentally, but also get paid handsomely for your time if you could. So that's when I eventually moved on an idea that I kind of gave birth to about 10 years prior and started to work for myself. And it was a pretty scary step, but one that, as I say, I've never regretted since, and it's been incredibly exciting to this day. So right now in the current time, I'm working as a performance consultant with within motorsport for Hints of Performance, but also within other elite athletes for myself, and also with CEO individuals, and trying to help those folks reach their potential too.
That's awesome, mate. That's awesome. I want to pick your brains a little bit on the Everton time, actually. And, you know, how long was you at Everton in the end?
Just over 3 years.
3 over. So towards like the back end of that, then what was your role there within the academy?
So I was head S&C coach, and we had, if you will, a head of the program for science and medicine at the time. So John McKeon, great guy, I'll give him a shout there. Anyone with an appetite to go and learn from an all-round quality mentor, go and check that environment out. And they've got a really good intern program, by the way, actually, through Liverpool John Moores Uni. And I was studying at Liverpool John Moores, and that was the kind of the connection link in there. But yeah, awesome environment, mate. Had fairly small staff working with me. Had full-time S&C coach, a couple of part-time casual coaches who would come in with a full-time sports scientist who was very much on the numbers there, because we would GPS all age groups from 12 to 18, a psychologist and a nutritionist, and plus, as I say, a busy intern program of 10 bodies. So it was quite busy. Got
you. So with I guess with that being the role that you had just before you decided to move into self-employment, there's obviously a little bit of, we all know strength and conditioning is quite often a very hours heavy type of role. You know, you put in more than full time and those types of things. Did you manage to kind of build that job around a little bit more work-life balance because you're a little bit more mature going into it, or was it something that quickly kind of escalated and snowballed into a point where you thought, you know what, this is something that does need to change?
Yeah, look, I mean, full transparency, I went into that role thinking, you know, I at least had a perception that, all right, someone at the top of the tree maybe has a little bit more of say and management of time, at least, and or ability to delegate. And this sounds incredibly arrogant, but delegate the lowest value tasks. And I don't mean that tasks don't matter, but tasks that can be done by many rather than one and or a few, right? Leadership decisions, let's say. So I figured that maybe within in that role, I could have a little bit more ownership of time, choice, freedom, etc. And as I mentioned before, I went into a role where that chap was not moving, and he hadn't moved for about 15 years. So that wasn't going to happen for me. So I was very much still an operative on the ground, and really enjoying the flexibility, if you will, to work across a number of groups, the way at least we scaled it in the academy. And I know that a few academies do it in a certain way on it differently, but it was still quite onerous in terms of time. Yeah. And, you know, 4 days out of 7, I wasn't seeing the kids because I was up and out to work with the 18s before they got up in the morning, and I might be back after I finished working with the 12 to 16s of the night time, and they're already in bed. And for me, looking sort of down the road, down through the lens, I thought that isn't necessarily a habit I want to continue. It certainly isn't the reason why I got into having kids and being a father that they saw now and again. And I think inherently within coaching, clearly we are challenged because we recognize that it's very time rich as a job. You're there to coach, you're there to provide your IP in person largely. But the prospect of packaging what you do, conveying its value, and building relationship with audience that perceives that value to be of high quality, high worth, was definitely just a really attractive prospect. And if we're honest, it isn't too different to what we do already. I think on the ground as full-time coaches, you know, you're trying to inform, educate, and inspire people maybe who aren't overly invested in their own physical preparation and or their application of it, at least, or buy into an exercise because they need to do it for an injury or whatever. Get them to do it on a level that is highly relatable to what they need, so you can demonstrate mastery, self-efficacy, and you're communicating in a way that increases motivation and holds them accountable to that. For me, that is very much selling at the same time, and I think, people, when they say the word marketing, and I don't know if we're going to get into this down the line, but ultimately marketing is just helping people make better decisions with the information you give them. And that's no different to what we do in coaching, frankly. An individual we spoke about before, Brett Bartholomew, probably says it better than everyone else. And it's inspiring individuals to take action with the information that you give them. So for me, it's one and the same. So having already kind of worked in gyms and a little bit of selling part of that, kind of knew some very rough bases, but yeah, I was definitely inspired to try and take it on my own terms, really. But yeah, definitely anxious about the step, particularly with young family and mortgage responsibilities there. But it's probably my wife more than anyone. I was a bit more prudent in terms of the move, and she was a bit more, come on, let's do it. Let's give it a pop. Like, we were talking before the call, probably gave me the freedom and all the security to say, listen, it doesn't work. We'll be okay. We'll make it happen. And maybe you go back to this other job or somewhere else. I think choice on my life on my terms was probably what I was aspiring to.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear, mate. I think it's really interesting to kind of hear around your mindset around those changes, because it is probably one of the biggest career switches you can make in this industry, outside of just completely leaving altogether. So yeah, it's cool to hear your thoughts around that. So I guess the next thing that you said that was really interesting is gravitating more towards motorsports. And, this is typically a very niche sport. You can't just pop down to the Formula 2 club around the corner and ask for an internship. So how did you manage to secure that? How did you go about getting the role with them?
Yeah, look, it definitely wasn't a sport and or a step I was thinking about. I mean, I don't mind admitting very naively that I think one of my very first UKSA workshops, there happened to be a guy, I think at the time was working in Formula 1, and his name escapes me. Seemed like a really nice guy. And I happened to ask him off the cuff, what sport are you involved in? And for sure he said motorsport. And I kind of sniggered, because I was so naive and clearly quite arrogant at that stage to think that why would anyone in motorsport need a physical preparation or an S&C coach? But fundamentally they do, because there are physical demands in that sport that are incredibly rigorous, and you've got to be fit enough to cope with the challenge of that and at least sustain the demand of that sport and the environments that it puts you in. If you take Formula 1, which probably most people are, I would imagine, more versed in, having watched the Netflix series, if anyone has, and there's 23 rounds, and there's arguably going to be more in the future that these guys perform in. A race in itself is a duration of 2 hours, roughly knocking around at 85% heart rate average for the race. Huge skill demand in terms of operationally what they have to do from a strategic point of view. So, the amount of gear shifts that they make up and down per corner that they're getting through is huge, whilst also racing for the same ideal racing line against a pack of 19 other cars on the track, traveling at 300 plus kilometers an hour, handling G's in the corners, finite braking, and ability to move the car on a dime if you suspect that there's a car coming up your inside or doing an overtake. So it's I've heard people describe it as everyone's like running a marathon whilst being punched in the head and doing algebra at the same time, because fundamentally it is. And these guys are fried physically and mentally when they get out of the car afterwards. I spend most of my time right now working in Formula 2, which to a lesser extent embodies a lot of what I've just described, really. We've got 14 rounds this year. There's 2 races per weekend of 16, 45 minutes respectively. And then similar to F1, we have free practice and qualification that comes into that weekend. So you're on site for a period of 5 days, but physically it's really onerous. And you're in different environments that have far ranging temperatures from cool to hot. So you've got to obviously factor that in terms of performance and its impact. But anyway, I digress. But the reason I kind of, I guess I came into it was Pete McKnight, who's the director of the organization. I knew through, he'd invite me to speak at the UKSA once when I was working in snow sport. And at the time, I think, 4 years ago, end of 2018, I think they were looking for more coaches and happened to reach out to him, and he said you should apply. And I went through a really rigorous interview process. And I think that was the first thing that really excited me about that. I get really, must be a little bit weird, but I get really excited by quite an intense interview process, because I think that fundamentally it really teases out your character, your competence, and your curiosity, and your ability to convey those things and add value through prior experiences. And of course, I couldn't, like many football clubs, they want to know what athletes or sports have you worked with that hopefully have got high relevance so that they can trust you when they put you on the pitch. In this environment, I was, clearly put my hands up and saying, I haven't got Scooby-Doo what these guys are doing in the car, and I won't profess to, but this is what I do know. This is how I think it maybe transfers and adds value here. So it was through that process that kind of got me interested, and then they give you an opportunity really to put your hand up and say, you want to go down the pro route, the elite route, which for most contracts at the moment, at least we have within Hinsa, is in the motorsport, and or the corporate. And you can apply what you know, as many coaches do it, and do a great job of educating, informing, and coaching high-end corporate clients. And we're talking CEOs and up. So high value net worth clients that the company are managing through yearly contracts, be that on a broad or small scale. I've got incredible value to the company. So yeah, I put my hand in the elite sports sector and really enjoying the challenge.
Awesome. Do you was there a strategic element to you picking that over like the corporate side? Is that something, you've kind of thinking, right, I'll do this now because long term I know I could probably deviate into that and I've got a little bit more, not integrity, but a little bit more worth there? Or is it just something that you thought, what, I'm only young once, elite sport and pro sport has its downfalls for the older man.
Yeah, true.
Did that kind of factor into it, or did you just think, let's go?
I think, well, do you know what? I mean, it's not been, I was saying I've gone into elite sport. I have, and so I contract a lot of my time through that avenue, but I've done a few corporate bits and bobs along the way. And I think that has given me great insight into how I might do that myself in the distant future. You and I were talking about just before the call about the longevity of coaching and the life cycle of the coach, and how we're very green behind the ears. And you're okay with the idea that you must demonstrate your worth and value on the coal face before you become maybe a bit more selective about what coal you're touching. And that I'm still, I think, very much in the mindset of being operative. However, because I have a family and because I'm thinking as a business owner, I'm also not willing to spend time in lower value areas, or areas where the client or the perception of that relationship is of a lower monetary value.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mind saying that I absolutely, there's for me, there's three things. I have a bit of a funnel, and this isn't a plug, it'll sound like it is in a moment, but a funnel that I go through really when I'm choosing projects and or people that I work with: family, fulfillment, and finance. And that was the very filter that I used at Everton Football Club, which is, whatever I do next, it has to allow me more time with the family, or at least some flexibility around choice and time that I have to spend more time there. Because as I mentioned, I was not spending quite the amount of time that I wanted there. Secondly, fulfillment, and this is a priority. Second, fulfillment was, I need to be working with people, projects, and environments that inspire me, enable me to be creative, but front and center, continue to be passionate about delivering what I do and why I do it. And then thirdly, which is finance. And again, we were chatting before the call, but I think when you're plus 10 years in, you recognize that you're making some very strategic steps with what you're learning, why you're learning it, and where you think it adds value. And on that path at that time, 13, 14 years as an employee, I was actively still seeking CPD at a rate that was similar to when I was at uni. I was chewing it up because I was thinking about collecting competencies and abilities that would ready the jump later on. And in doing so, it means that whenever I'm working with a client, you tend to have a bit of a filter, and you recognize that you're probably not the ideal client for me, because the perception here is that you're just looking at me time for money lens, which is what you mentioned before. And I think as coaches, that's a mindset that we have to challenge, because if you're constantly selling an hour, you're then going to struggle to communicate or convey the value of your hour compared to someone else. Mm-hmm. But yet you may feel that you've got distinguishing abilities or IP that actually is better than Ben down the road at a gym doing that. And that's just the challenge of business. Unfortunately, it's been able to, become known, liked, and trusted, and influence people with their spending by buying you. So the whole part of knowing your worth, and being prepared to put that out there, I think is a really important but less done step for coaches who, I've made some many mistakes. In one particular interview, I hate the question, but HR sits there and it's gone well. They sit there and they go, "Thanks very much for that. Can you tell us what your remuneration was in your last role?" And you're like, that's a bit of a cheeky question, right? Fundamentally, but you tell them, and maybe you embellish it a little bit, but nonetheless, you know that they've got a link in there, so you have to probably be somewhat accurate. So you tell them, and the next question is, so how much are you looking to achieve here? And that's when you go, oh, if you're not ready for that question, you fluff it. And the fluff for me was more or the same. I got home and the wife could have killed me. More or the same. What does that even mean? So unsurprisingly, the offer comes through 24 hours later, and it's the same bloody salary package. I mean, what at all? But inherently, there's a couple of things there, because as someone who's trying to be attractive, right, and taken on by someone else, you're not trying to overprice yourself, because they may just say no flat out to you, because actually you're not a good fit, and all that says a lot about you as a character who's maybe too arrogant for what's really doable here. And secondly, probably more commonly, you have completely underdone and underprepared yourself for the sell. And that, whether you're working for yourself or you're working in employment, is fundamental to your ability to get anywhere near financial freedom. It really is, because, for sure, we're doing this because we're passionate. We haven't put the mileage and the spend into university because we're not interested in a long-standing career here. But as we've said before, if you've got the financial commitments of a house and a certain lifestyle with a family and a holidays that you want to do and you achieve, and you want choice in that lifestyle, you have to be paid handsomely for that. So just taking the market average as a salary ain't going to cut it, unfortunately, in this day and age, especially in a saturated market where the supply of coaches is far greater than, at least in elite sport, the demand for jobs. Now, I think that's getting better, but nor the rates that we need it to based on what we're pumping out at university every year. So you have to be able to sit there and figure as a strategy what your worth is. You have to base that on a few things. Time is not what you're basing it on, I can tell you that. You need to be basing it on experience, credibilities and qualifications, be that additional things you've achieved since university as well. Your ability to demonstrate that what you've done previously delivers results for the person in front of you. So that's relevant, it's meaningful, and it speaks to their curiosity, because that is going to help you gain some trust. And you have to be able to communicate and convey that at a level that they understand, with which they can then make a decision on the information that you've given them. That's a package. That's not an hour. I'm giving away some of my best value here. That's a package, not an hour. Don't sell in hours is the key message there. So the cultural shift within personal training is coming, but the idea of just selling hours, time, weekly packages, that has to go in the trash, because it's inconsistent, it lacks security, and it means that you're speaking to people in the short term, which means you've got to have that money conversation again in 6 weeks' time, because you've only sold 6 weeks worth of training, and or you've sold an hour of training, and now you get a flutter in your belly and you go, I'm gonna have to ask, do they want to work with me again next week? That's not continuity. It certainly isn't security. So one of the things I'm speaking to mentees about when I'm talking about starting a business and running it successfully and be able to scale over time is that you need to build a system that gives you the security that is one of the reasons why you're not making a jump in the first place if you're considering it as an employee. So you build that into your system. As a machine, it protects you if you've got a few skinny months. You're not on your ass, you're not worried about paying your mortgage. And so fundamentally, I think that's one of the biggest things that probably stands in the way of folks. And it was the same for me when you're thinking about risk versus opportunity of going it alone and maybe working for yourself.
It's so interesting hearing you speak about that, mate, because I was looking at like the average PT rate in Sheffield, that's where I live. And for the past 20 years, it's been the same. It has not budged a single, like not 10p. It's still roughly £35, but the price of living's going up and going up and going up. And there's more people fighting for those £35 hours. And, I know some PT quals do like a little bit of a business module, but I know from my experience of probably a similar kind of educational background as yours, BSc, MSc, UKSEA, not once did we get spoke to about what you're just saying there around, well, how do you actually perform well in an interview? How do you negotiate salary? How do you convey your results in a really positive way? And that's a huge, huge problem.
Exactly.
It's mad, mate. It's mad.
Exactly. And I think because of that, it perhaps, well, I think it does limit your field of scope when you think of the opportunities that are available to you whilst at university, thinking about what path am I looking at here? And look, I knew early on, and I think most people do. I think you're probably naive if you don't. You know that you're stepping into a volume-based job. You know that the hours are heavy, and you know that the salaries are predetermined and set based on the mean average, based on what a board and custodians of said organizations believe or perceive the value of your job is worth. I mean, how many times, I certainly did, if you're speaking to colleagues about, Christ, this player is getting paid thousands of pounds a month and I'm getting paid that a month. Sure, they're more valuable than me in terms of, getting points on the board and points being pounds. I get that, but I'm one of the facilitators that enable that guy to stay on the pitch every single week because I can fuck him up, or I can help him do his job for longer. And the constructs there are huge, right? Well, the gap is huge. Where am I going with this? But one of the first experiences that I had with it was in rugby. I went to one of the annual days that the RFU put on, education days. Awesome day, huge room. There was a few breakouts with, you could go to, I think, psychology in one area, technical in another area, physical in another area. And I went for the physical piece. And I looked around the room, and the room was filled with, at the time, it must have been 90% males. I'm sure that's improved now. Hope it has. But majority were single and or divorced. And they were men in late 30s, 40s, 50s. And I thought, all right, I'm not sure if that's a future that I want necessarily, but I also understood that is a necessary cost of doing business. And I'd lost relationships over my career, but at the time I was happy to make the hit because I'm going career. This is me. I'm all in. I was the guy who paid my way through university from a PT job, which was 20, 30 hours a week whilst at university. I was working. I wasn't flat out partying every single weekend. So I probably had different intentions, but the cost of doing business is real. You're going to do a lot of hours. Your pay's going to be dictated, and the opportunities that come at you are there if you apply yourself. You do a great job. And look, I'm not in any way, and I won't, because my grounding was from being an employed person. In any way, saying working for someone else is bad. It's not, because it gets you in an environment, in a space where you're connecting with like-minded individuals, who challenge you, can educate you, you can learn from, and fundamentally, we all beg, borrow, and steal practices that we've seen years gone by. So that's a formidable experience that you need, and I wouldn't be where I am without those experiences. So would I change it? Possibly not. Would I have gone and done what I did maybe a bit earlier? Perhaps, yeah, because you see the other side of the fence.
I think just kind of jumping in on that one, mate. I think what you're saying there is so true. These employment situations where you spend a bunch of time, time on task, learning from other people, making mistakes, all those things. That is learning. That is education, and I think that is a little bit of my worry post-COVID, where everything is going online, and I think there's probably a lot of coaches, PTs, psychologists, all these people that are instantly going to that online space without necessarily having the experience to really maximize those things and scale down from what the gold standard is of working in person. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I agree. It's the running before you can walk example, isn't it? If you're trying to sell to, so I think one of the things that's probably getting some momentum at the moment is there's some good individuals with great experience at coaching as an employed coach through Prem clubs who have gone to work for themselves, and they're working. You can see off season's prime for it at the moment, but they're working with Prem lads on their own, under their own guise, one-to-one coaching on the pitch or in groups, in the gym, wraparound service, you name it. Great. You're going to struggle to compete with those boys if you step out of university and you're less than 5 years experienced. You are, because the depth of experience, competence, and qualities that they've got is, it's way greater than yours. So again, this is a little bit of a contradiction here, but you do have to get your hands messy. You do have to work hard and long at the coalface, but you have to do so at a level that enables you to understand how not to do it. So when you're going to go and work for yourself and put your own name above the door, that what bestows that brand is that someone who gets results, high quality coaching, high quality individual. You can only get that through a high level of self-awareness and experience from working at the coalface in employee environments where, I worked in programs where you, on some instances, were coaching 8 groups a day. Like the volume of coaching was massive. You were absolutely shocked, but Christ, you learned shitloads.
Mm-hmm.
And you got better year on year because of that experience. Was it sustainable? No. And no one's saying that you should do that every year either. Nobody wants that when they're 30 plus. But it is formidable to create a level of craft and an ethos that means you do things differently. And I was speaking to Chris Toombs a while ago, and again coming back around to this conflicting idea of charging for an hour versus charging your value. The reason why you can charge an amount of money in a particular hour is because of all the experiences that have gone before that enable you to stand in front of that individual and guarantee that they're going to get more results with that information that you give them or those movements that you give them, whatever it might be, because of all the stuff that's gone before versus someone else has done the same course as you but has less than 5 years experience. So communicating that's important.
It's that analogy of you're not paying somebody to the time it takes to turn a screw. You're paying them for the experience it took them to figure out which screw to turn.
Absolutely.
And it's
but better than I did. Absolutely.
It's that, and I think we could go on for a long while with this one, mate. And I'm going to put a full stop on this one, because I think if anybody wants to kind of dig into this a little bit more with you, then head over to John's stuff. Like he said, he has a mentorship. He puts out a lot of these informations out there. So kind of head over to him for that. And hopefully this is kind of giving people the taste just to kind of invest in those thoughts a little bit more. So moving on to, I guess, the S&C side then. So I want to dig into the Formula 2. I want to dig into that type of thing. And you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but give us a little bit of an insight into when you first started working with them. When you do a little bit of a needs analysis, you look at what the average person is and what it actually takes to win. Give us a little bit of an insight into your thoughts around that.
Yeah. Okay. So within that environment, one of the challenges that what you're trying to do, like in most club environments, organizations that you've been in, you recognize that time is your greatest commodity. And what defines what value or return you can get from that particular time is the schedule, the travel along with that schedule. But they're slightly different in that these guys are full-time travelers. They're like gypsies, really. So they might be in their home base for a very short window of time. So you get some face-to-face time, but then they're working remotely for a lot of the other time if you're not traveling full-time with them. I have some colleagues that are doing that. I'm not doing that with a particular driver at the moment. So I'll give my example. I'm working about 125 days with a particular Formula 2 driver. I don't see him 125 days because his demands are that he might be at home where he's training and able to train with me, or he'll be traveling back to his homeland to go and work with his manager, meet with sponsors, potentially go to the team where the factory is based and they're doing meetings there, simulator days with the team. They'll maybe have some additional driving days where they go and do some actual skill stuff, or they go and do some karting, because a lot of guys do that in the off season because it's relevant in terms of skill. And then you've got a little bit of training that's left on the end of it. So what you're trying to do is basically weave a periodized program into a very fluid environment, which means that they have to get the job done anywhere they are in the world. And of course, it needs to be periodized around so that optimally, when they step into a car on a race weekend for competition, that they can perform at their best. All the while still trying to progressively improve them throughout the season, year on year, because the guys at this stage in Formula 4, 3 and 2 on that pathway are trying to get, everyone's at the bottleneck trying to get into Formula 1, and of which there's maybe 1 to 2 a year, if that get through, and there's no guarantees. And by the way, the progression isn't on skill or talent alone either. And we've seen a few guys in that in previous years gone by. It's not like an academy setting in football or rugby, let's say, where traditionally we understand that the best talent gets a contract in the first team. Best talent in Formula Racing might get a contract into a team, but what will also determine that is the likelihood of the package that comes with the driver.
Okay.
How big is the brand? How much money have they got? And therefore, how can a team leverage those assets for their own gain? And there's a few drivers that have paid their way, if we like, into the sport thus far. And anyone who knows the sport will know who that is. And there are others who can't, frankly, get through the bottleneck or cross the chasm because despite the fact that they're shit hot and they've got great talent, they just haven't got the financial backing to get there. And so they're overlooked. So you're hyper aware of that as a coach and your ability to support them in managing their schedule, their time, to facilitate growth in a lot of areas beyond just the weight room or their physical performance. In terms of physical performance, the place where I start in every sense of the word really is assessing, because if you're not assessing, you're guessing. And I want to look at fundamentally what are the things that enable them to physically be at a competitive level and what are the things that would prevent them from being at a competitive level. Unlike in, say, contact sports or running based sports, these guys don't necessarily usually have incidents of impact related injuries or soft tissue injuries. They will get problems from long durations of time sat in the car and repetitive injuries, let's say but it's rare, but of the wheel and or sustainability around the neck. So usually these guys will complain of things like neck pain or neck problems and lower back issues as well, because of they're in a seat and they're strapped into a seat. It's a carbon fiber seat that's molded to their body shape. So that's on their side. And yet, if you and I sit here for another 5 hours talking, we're probably going to get feeling a bit stiff in our hips and our back at some stage. So you are acutely aware of that and the mileage on their body in that sense. So fundamentally, I want to make sure that from a movement efficacy point of view, that they move well, they can access full range of movement in athletic movements that, to be fair, do take them beyond the car as well. I think if the lens is just to prepare someone to sit in a seat, you are very limited in what you're doing athletically. So, I'm very much going with the ethos that we're trying to build well-rounded athletes here that athletically, in training at least, can do racket sports. They can run. Like Jason Button, who was an F1 driver years by, he used to be a competitive triathlete. Like, these guys like to do a lot of athletic things. So we want them to explore that. Similarly, if they're going to handle loads of around 5 or 6 Gs of lateral G-force in a corner, so high-speed corners where if anyone's throwing their car around a roundabout, you feel the loading of your car, you feel your car tilt or tip a little bit. The neck's taking the brunt of that because F1 cars, there's a little bit of give in the tyre, but the structure of the car and the build of the car means that there's a minimum amount of movement on the car. So the driver therefore wears, if you like, that reaction off the tyre into the body, and they're trying to constrain that, which is why they're strapped in so heavily and why the neck has to be incredibly strong. So from a needs of strength, neck is absolutely number one. Trunk is number two. And then in lower categories, it's more important, but braking strength. Braking strength is number three. So these guys need high amounts of max force, single leg, and an ability to apply that very, very quickly when trying to slam on the brakes into a high-speed corner to carry momentum in and accelerate. So those are the kind of three things from a strength point of view as well. But fundamentally, in my practice, I'm looking at, from a biomechanical point of view, what issues or historical problems that is this individual and a group are facing. How do we address those correctively within some of our prep work and our training programs? Is the strength work befitting to making sure that they are car fit and constantly nudging that area? Aerobically is huge. I think we were speaking before the call, but there's a lot of high level F2 and F1 guys likewise that have a VO2 akin to endurance athletes on a bike or cross-country skiers. These are fit boys. The ability to hold 85% max heart rate for an hour or 2 hours and do a full days of testing means that these guys have got phenomenal aerobic endurance. They've got really good threshold qualities. And they can do that again and again and again. And of course, handle the rigors of travel, changing environments, have a healthy immune system, because we know that's important. And so an aerobic fitness enables them to do that. So we're not that interested often in peak power and speed, although arguably it could be said that hand speed's important, especially when they're making quick maneuvers. But then you're getting quite niche, I think, in certain exercises that you'd use to train that.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of look through the lens of, let's make sure that from a human point of view, that they're athletic, they move well. From a performance point of view, they then got the specific race fitness qualities that we so desire and need. And then thirdly, there'd be some absolute race performance qualities that we're trying to develop and facilitate, at least through the training, which is, as you and I were talking about before, more of the neurological qualities, the cognitive qualities of memory retention, because of what they're doing for 2 hours or an hour, gear shifts up and down, multiple dials for on their wheel, different buttons, trying to communicate with the team while still handling a car at 300 kilometers an hour and reacting to cars around you or the racing line or changes in weather. Like the demand on them cognitively is massive. And then the other piece, which I've started to step into a bit more and I'm really enjoying actually, is the performance under adversity or coping with pressure and performing under pressure. So performance psychology arguably is probably one of the biggest facilitators that we've got at our disposal, and we will provide drivers through Hinter as well. So yeah, it's a real wraparound service. And then trackside, the other additions that you're thinking about that are a little bit more acute trackside is heat management. So these guys are often racing in ambient temperatures of high 20s or 30 degrees plus, track temperatures of 40 to 50 degrees. They're sat in front of an engine, which is heating them up, and they're in fireproof safety suit with undergarments underneath as well and a helmet. They're losing up to 3 kilograms of body weight in a race in a hot environment. So there's a lot of heat management strategies that we'll do pre and after to facilitate recovery as well. And therefore, obviously, we're thinking about hydration strategies and the impact of that cognitively. Fueling strategies is paramount. In F1, there's a weight limit on the car. So ideally, these guys aren't any heavier than 80 kilograms. What's quite interesting, if you look at the morphology of drivers over time, is that they've gone from quite small and they're now quite tall. A couple of guys in particular, Esteban Ocon, Jordan Russell, Hulkenberg, like they're big boys, over 6 foot, and they've got to fit in the cockpit and obviously carry a mass that isn't adding to drag force and slowing the vehicle down, because every gram is important. I mean, I don't know if everyone's watched this year, but if you looked at Williams at the start of the year with a new car, they were actually taking paint off of the car, which kind of, if you will, challenges the branding in some ways, but taking paint off the car to save weight because weight's a cost. So you're very mindful of that also as a coach. But all in all, in Formula 2, 3, 4, you are working with young developing males largely. There's women in the women's category as well, but I'm working with young developing males who are still going through huge up and downs of testosterone, still learning who they are, what they're about in the world, and yet having to communicate, give direction, and sometimes challenge men in 30s, 40s, 50s plus, huge amounts of experience in the sport, engineers telling them, no, this is what the car needs to do. And they're saying, yeah, but this is what I feel, and trying to get through that particular scenario and still do that with relationships intact and handling the pressure cooker of, but I've just gone out and had a shocker, and now I need to go out again this afternoon or tomorrow and put that right. So it's a real smelting pot of pressure. And undoubtedly, because you are the one that spends the most time with these people, you're there to try and facilitate as much success in all areas as you can.
I think I'm just trying to sum up what you just said, mate, but there's so much, and I think doing it in one sentence would just be an utter disservice to how much actually goes on behind the scenes. But I think, if I had to try and sum up, your role within improving performance is very holistic. That's how it sounds to me. You're not a strength guy. You're not a mobility guy. You're not just one thing. One of the things that I thought was super interesting, you mentioned it earlier around like spending an hour to 2 hours above 85% heart rate, and then trying to do a task that is incredibly under pressure that you literally could die doing. that's mad, run a bleep test and then, try and drive as fast as you can whilst you've got somebody screaming in your ear to do something better. It's going to be mad.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's crazy. What would you say your particular challenges are then? So you just kind of mentioned about the athlete and what they have to go through. You as a coach, you as a practitioner in this role, what are some of the things that you have to kind of battle working with them?
So culturally, they're not, as I mentioned, similar to football or rugby or other traditional based sports or stopwatch sports. They're not traditionally, they don't see strength and conditioning or physical preparation as a hugely important piece. They see time in the car, they see being a good enough driver, and they see the mileage as being probably three key qualities that they've got to invest a lot of time in. And what usually enables them to do that, of course, as well, is the money and all the backing behind them to do that. Often you've got influences in the sport in that sense with the father, usually either their high net worth individual who's very invested in their son, because the unique thing about, and I'm going to come to the kick here in a moment, but the unique thing about this sport as well is that these guys have to pay to drive a car. They're not being paid to drive a car. So you're not picking up a salary like an academy or a first team player. You're paying sums of millions per year to a team to drive a car. So number one, you've got to be good enough, and number two, you've got to be rich enough. In Formula 2, for example, on average, you're paying 2 million per year to drive a car. So the pressures that comes with that is huge, because you've constantly got to raise or find the capital to support your dream and get you anywhere near over time where you think you could be in a position to be good enough for F1, let alone chosen based on skill. And thus, when you're working with someone that isn't coming from a traditional sense, I see training as a natural stepping stone to be good at my sport, physically fit enough, mentally capable enough, and they've also got maybe some affordances around cash in their lifestyle, the way they live their life and how they travel, you're having to probably break down some connotations there in a person and a behavior, shall we say. These guys don't usually understand what hard training is, or if they've got a good training background, they're very good in the cardio sense. Like maybe they're smashing hills and they're doing regular road biking stuff. Very few of them are well versed in the gym. I've never met, and I work with quite a few at the moment, I've never met a professional motorsport athlete who was shit hot in the gym. They're usually very good from an endurance point of view. They spend a lot of time doing it because they're a young guy who's, I'm going to get out and go for a run or go on a bike. They've sort of got some idea of nutrition, but it's very rough. But there's a real opportunity there to educate and nudge an individual in a direction. So once you've kind of gone through that initial consultation, you're then thinking about where's the time best spent for this guy, because you can raise the ceiling physically, but whilst that might be great and look good on paper and numbers, that might not necessarily transfer to more podiums. So then you're, as you talked about there, holistically looking at the map and saying, right, in all these areas, where's the biggest margin for improvement here? And there's been a couple of guys that I've worked with where it has been more to performance psychology, and so you lean hard into that space. In others, it has frankly been more wellness around, lifestyle choices of sleep, nutrition, and those sorts of things. So you end up kind of leaning into those spaces. But the challenge usually is to get an individual inspired to take action on forms that are going to transfer to give them better sustainability or more potential for performance. And secondly, you're trying to speak to and influence the stakeholders around that individual, which have also got their fingers into how they're persuading a certain driver to live their life and make certain decisions, be that the father or be that the team or be that managers and whoever that might be. The best guys that I speak to, unsurprisingly, are forward-thinking, integrative, and recognize that the car race will not be won or lost just on skill alone. The ones who, and that's kind of met with drivers as well, that are a bit more self-aware, they're a bit more grounded, and they're amenable to be coached. Other individuals who are challenges to be coached usually have quite an oppressing father who's got some very deep pockets, and they say, "Oh, hi," and daddy jumps, So it's a really interesting sport in that sense. And you really get to understand and see and feel the differences under a person because of the time that you spend with these individuals, and how you play such a supporting role in that, at least if you're full time. The older that they get, of course, it is a little bit more quality assurance, and you're just making sure that they're staying fit and healthy, and probably trying to unburden their life as much as you can. I mean, it's not uncommon, and I do now at Formula 2 because it's part of the job, but it's not uncommon if you're maybe staying, let's say, in an Airbnb that's nice, it's near the track, maybe you're getting up and cooking breakfast, you've done the shop, you're cooking a nice breakfast. They've got the salmon, eggs, and avocado right there, and you're doing them some nice coffee or whatever. Maybe you're carrying the bags, and you're the driver, you're the taxi man to and from the track as well. But when you're driving an Aston Martin, it's probably not too bad either. So there's a few things that come with that inherently you just don't experience in more stopwatch and or ball sports. But yeah,
it's just as you were kind of going through that, mate. Like, I kept just referring back to what we were speaking about before. You do not learn any of that at university. You do not learn any of that on your UKSA workshops, and that's not bad mouthing either of those two things. They are incredibly important, but there's so much more that goes into being a really good coach than just having the qual. And you've kind of mentioned a bunch of different disciplines there that, let's say at the academy level at Everton, you would have a nutritionist that would kind of take that. You'd have a psychologist, and I guess you're having to absorb all of those different skill sets and make it ready, accessible for your drivers. Does that sum it up?
Definitely. And look, I'll be the first one to say that, God, hang on a minute, John, you're a sports scientist, S&C, and do a bit of physical therapy. You think you can speak to people about performance psychology? Really? Can you? When a guy's paying $2 million on a seat, and what your involvement can or may influence what happens there in a negative way. Like, and don't get me wrong, you're not getting in a position where you're having very, very close to the bone conversations that are frankly a little bit uncomfortable and out your skill set. You're not. More often than not, because of the positions that the experience that I've had, you're often in the room with said psychologists within reason, having conversations with the athlete, and so you're picking stuff up. If you've been in enough dressing rooms on a Friday or a Saturday, and you've seen the talks from the coach, and you've seen how individuals in that staff operate and they get around the individuals and manage people, more often than not, a lot of that common sense stuff does come out in the wash when you're having these conversations. What Hinter have been great for, and Chris Gooder, the performance psych that we use in particular, has been great for, is giving me and us as coaches a framework with which to deliver a set of processes in. So it's not when you hear this, do this. It's recognize the direction that we know this guy's heading in. How does that direction align with what we know to be their optimal set of mindset and or behaviors? And what can you do to redirect and or facilitate the direction of that particular avenue? So for example, one of the guys that I first worked with in Formula 2, second race of the year, we had a race circuit in Baku. Actually, we've just been to Baku the other weekend in Formula 1. And it's as a street circuit goes, there's such a small margin of error, right? Where if you get it wrong, the cost is you're wrapping a car around a barrier, and you might really injure yourself as well. But that's going to cost the team thousands of pounds. To put it into context, a front wing is about 15 grand. So these things are incredibly expensive, and of course time expensive, because back in the garage then we've got the team who've got to go through that on top of all the other duties to get the car turned around and ready for the next window or the next outing. So you're highly aware of that. Thus is the driver, and that can drive some pretty useful and or harmful behaviors, such as someone becomes very fear avoidant, right? They don't like rolling the dice, they don't want to push the car on the margins, and they don't want to really take themselves into a place that feels a little bit uncomfortable. So they'd rather stay in a place where it's really controlled, very safe, but you're not, as we talk about, you're not putting in purple sectors. The lap times are usually broken into sectors, and you can see the guys who are absolutely putting out PBs on the clock, purple, or it's a white if you know there's no improvement. You see the lads who don't take risk, just stay in a very comfort zone. After their first effort, their first push lap, they're not really improving their times and they finish down the points. It's done consistently enough, and you recognize that that's an individual that has a problem with taking risk and or dealing with the consequence of risk. And thus, a lot of the prep calls that you have before you get to a race weekend is go, okay, what do we think is a meaningful expectation for us this week? I.e., where do we think we can finish and achieve? Okay, what might our processes look like to try and achieve that? So what kind of mental approach are we going with? What are we going to be telling ourselves? What are we thinking about? What are we going to be doing before we get in the car? And all those things obviously feed into feel, think, act of what they're going to do before they go and do it. Marry that with the information that we get from the engineers and how they want them to do certain things or manage the behavior of the car or optimize the tire performance. And then throughout, you're listening to all the conversations. You're never active on the radio. It just doesn't happen in someone in my position, and so it shouldn't. But you're listening constantly back and forth from the engineer to the driver, so you're constantly attuned to the emotional stress, if you will, even how they tone out certain words, and that's all feeding into your information about, right, this is the state I think he's in, and this is how I think he's coping with what we talked about and what we plan to go and do next. And then you have that debrief and you try and align that with, what does that fit what we talked about doing? How do you think we can get back to that point? So you're constantly challenging, supporting the direction that they're going in mentally, and trying to use certain strategies that we've been supported with through the program. So I really enjoy it, but if nothing else, I think it fundamentally challenges you as a person and a coach to have your handle on what you're about. What's your what are your defaults from a mindset and a behavior point of view? And how do you thrive and cope under pressure? How do you react when someone's cut you up outside? Or how do you respond to when your missus is getting on you? All those things that simply every single day we do 100 times, but sometimes we don't necessarily challenge and or reflect on and think that probably could have gone a bit better. What are the steps to do that better next time? That's what we're trying to do over here with our high performers. So yeah, it's fascinating, really, and it definitely keeps you on your toes.
I think, just with what you were saying there, it's good that Hinsa have kind of put you in a position where you can kind of learn and then use similar language as the performance psychs and all those types of things. But like that's the way it should be. Everyone kind of operating from a similar hymn sheet and just being in a situation where you can kind of push this driver, this athlete forward, and you're very aligned. And I guess your point at the beginning with saying, well, who am I to kind of speak to somebody about performance psychology? At the end of the day, every interaction you have with somebody in any given day is going to be affecting your psychology, whether they are aware of it or not. The way your missus speaks to you today, okay, that's either going to make you in a good mood or a bad mood. You're going to go to a coach, you're going to speak to him, good mood, bad mood. I would rather be speaking to somebody from an informed place than, any knobhead on the street can, put him in a bad place. So I'd much rather, have somebody that's actually invested in it. So I think, and that's kind of those weird situations, isn't it? When, people will be very quick to say, right, you need to stay in your lane here. You're the strength coach. But I think when you do get to those elite kind of stages and performance is the goal, lines get really blurry. And I guess remind me of the guy's name who brought you in. Did you say it was Chris?
Pete McKnight. Pete McKnight's the head of coaching, director of coaching. Yeah.
So do you from an organizational standpoint, is there regular debriefs or anything where you kind of speak through your performances as practitioners? Does that kind of happen?
With one-on-one with your management, yes. So for instance, I will do that formally and or informally with Pete. And like many organizations, they have their formal processes of, right, let's have a review process every quarter. How has that gone against some of the objectives that you've got for yourself? How have your learning objectives gone? And how do you feel you're now growing into that space a bit more? Could you target that as a need for you? And as coaches, you recognize those shortcomings, and inevitably you're supported through CPD and or network to go and get that experience. And in the way that I have within the performance psychology, you're actively, off the track, the guy who's watching those conversations take place, feeding your pen within, and then enabling and facilitating that as a conduit trackside, as the person who's who's there right before they get in the car and right when they get out of the car, and even back at the hotel. There's many of us who I'm sure have had conversations at 2 a.m. where the guy is a bit upset about where things are going at the moment, and you're having to manage that situation. So that's there. But then more formally, there are qualifications that we take on as well, and I'm doing one this year that I really enjoy. So you're definitely supported through that process. And I think that at this level, when naturally you're consistently reviewing the direction of the individual that you coach and how their performances aren't improving and how that is seen on the grid. You tend to do that, I think, for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Where you tend to sort of, it's a bit of a running reference for your impact and value as a coach as well, all things considered, right? But if you know that there's a guy there who's got great ability and he's got the minerals to get it done, and yet he's still not doing it, there's something missing. So how are you aiding and or getting in the way of that? So for me, I think it's quite a natural process, really. But we do that formally and informally.
That's awesome. That's cool. That's been great, mate. I really enjoyed. I think I just love listening to people speak about something that they know. I just find it a really kind of empowering thing. You get a little bit of motivation from it. It doesn't really matter if it's just sport. I don't know if you get the same feeling of when somebody is passionate about a topic and is good at it, it's just cool to listen to. And that's what I've kind of got from that.
Thanks very much.
So what's next for you, mate? What have you got coming up? Like what's the next few years kind of looking like?
Well, probably staying in motorsport for the time being. I'm really enjoying that. Like I sort of talked about before, the fulfillment piece is big there for me. And whilst it takes me away from the family when you're track side and you're doing the travel, when I'm home, I'm home. And I'm certainly more present than I ever was at any one time. Alongside that, I'm still trying to grow as a business owner and entrepreneur as well. So I'm thinking about how I scale and push my offering to broader audiences. And the challenges, like most people have got, I guess, of trying to coach either in person or remotely, online training, coach mentoring. Do you build products and all the rest of it? So for me, I'm still very much in the growth phase of that kind of life cycle of a business, really. And I'm enjoying supporting others do that as well. So for me, it's going to be a continuation of getting in the coal face and offering my value to the right people, and then thinking about how I can scale that. And I think one of the things that I probably have enjoyed in the last few years too is the corporate space. Cool. And being able to package the lessons and experiences that I've got and make that I think palatable for coaches who for corporate individual CEOs who are invested on for different reasons, but still are looking for performance in the boardroom. They're looking for career sustainability, longevity, and being healthy as well. So that's proving to be quite an exciting space.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool. And where can people find you in terms of, I guess, social media? Do you put much out on social media? Where can they find you?
Probably the most busy on Instagram at the moment, but I've got an Instagram and Twitter, and the handle is I think at John Noonan Coach. Is it? I'll have to check that. That's awful.
That's fine. I'll put it in the show notes regardless.
Yeah, John Noonan Coach. But you can reach out to me there. Our website is noonanperformance.com.
That's awesome, mate. Cool. I just want to thank you, mate, for taking your time. Just kind of talk to us about a really niche topic. And there's going to be so many nuggets of like golden nuggets of value in this. I'm absolutely pumped about it. I'm buzzing for people to hear it. I'm buzzing for the feedback I know we're going to get. So really appreciate it, mate. Thank you.
Well, listen, mate, thank you. And thanks for doing such a great job of putting a platform together that is worthwhile and people are coming to listen to. So thanks for your time, mate.
Awesome. Thank you.